Old Testament is often overlooked. It's often unread. There are a lot of books in the Old Testament that some of you may have never read. I mean, you think about Habakkuk or even Ezra and Nehemiah and Esther, and maybe have you ever read all of Isaiah or some of those prophets like Jonah and Micah and Nahum and Zechariah and Amos, and we start looking at it and go, I don't know. I don't even know what those books are about. And sometimes when you think about the Old Testament, it's long, it's complex. You say, I don't know how anybody could really understand it. But we want to think about the Old Testament for just a second. And you remember we said this, that the Old Testament really looks forward to the coming Messiah. The whole central thing of the whole Bible is the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. The New Testament looks back to the Messiah who came. The Old Testament looks forward. The Genesis 3:15 is the promise of the Messiah that the seed of woman will crush the head of the serpent. And so the Old Testament is looking forward to the Redeemer. Those 39 books basically are talking about the seed of woman coming through, basically the seed of woman into the seed of Abraham to the son of David. And the Old Testament gives us the idea of creation of all things, and then the fall of man, God's provision, the choosing of a man named Abraham. And you think about it, his name was Abram, which meant Big Daddy. That's what it meant, High Father, but it meant Big Daddy. He had no children. He lived in the Ur of the Chaldees. God told him to leave that land and go somewhere else. God changed his name later to Abraham, which means the father of many nations. Still had no children. And so it's just a promise that God made him. And he made a covenant with this man and these people that come through him, which we call the Jewish people. The Bible is a Jewish book. We think that Luke may not have been Jewish. If Luke was not Jewish, he is the only author of the Scripture that's not Jewish. So you have so much in the Scripture, and it's a Jewish book giving us basically the history of the Jewish people and God's plan, how he's going to use them, because through the Jewish people came two things. Came the Word of God and the Messiah, and that's the key, and we'll think about it. When we think about the Old Testament, it looks big, and it's like almost impossible. Somebody says, how are you going to read all that? Even if you have one of those reading plans, read through the Bible in a year, I mean, even then you get bogged down. You think, gosh, there's just so much in there. But it's actually fun to put it together. And I'm going to show you tonight how you can put the whole Old Testament together at one time. Now, there's an Old Testament course that we teach in CBI, and it takes 14 lessons. We don't have to do that. We can just do it in one lesson. And that's what we'll do tonight. We'll see how it fits together. It's kind of fun, and we'll see the flow. Now, let's think about the Old Testament for a second. We said the Jewish Old Testament, what do they call it? What do they call it? The Tanakh. The Torah, the Nebiim, the Ketubim, which is the law, the prophets, prophets, and writings. And so you want to see that. Now, think about this. Our Old Testament, now, the central focus of the Old Testament is what? Coming of the Messiah, the promise of the Messiah, looking forward to the Messiah. Okay, the second big part here is the Old Testament is divided into 4 sections. Now, we're talking about ours. How do we divide it? What do we say? What's the first one? The law, or the Pentateuch, okay? You can say either way you want to put it. You can put down law if you want to. We know that's how many books? That's the first 5 books, right? Then the second section is what? History. And, of course, we'll talk about the flow of history through the Old Testament, how it fits. What's the third part called? What it's called poetry or writings or even wisdom literature. You can put all that in. But mostly, if you put poetry or writings, you're going to be okay. And then what's the fourth section called? The prophets. And well, just think about it for a second. The prophets are divided into 2 sections. Major and minor prophets. Okay, now here's what we're going to do, which is a little bit different than we normally do. You see where it says law there. And then if you look at the next page, if you flip the next page, it says, I don't know if it's on a different page or not. Is there history after that? And then writings and then prophets. Now, just go back under the law. And what we're going to do, back under the law. We don't want to go back under the law, but go back under the law and let's talk about it. I'm going to take you through the Old Testament. We're going to sort of do it together, and we'll see how it fits together. You can write down as much as you want to write, and we'll see how it fits. So let's start with the law. What's it called? It's called the what? The Pentateuch, or it's also called the what? The Torah. The first 5 books, they were written by Moses. Now, here's what I want to do. I want to start, and we're going to take our way through the Old Testament. It's kind of a lot of fun. I'm going to write a lot of stuff on the board. You don't have to write down everything. Write down some things. Write things that you feel are important or things that you want to remember. But let's start going through the Old Testament. What's the first book? The book is Genesis. Okay, what does Genesis mean? Okay, it means the book of beginnings, and it is. And all the things that start in the book of Genesis basically all come to an end. Most of them come to an end in the book of Revelation. How about that? Beginning and the end. Okay, we're going to get it. Yeah. We're off to a slow start, if you know what I mean. No. Okay, let's think about it. In Genesis, there were 4 big events, the book of Genesis. There was creation, the fall, the flood, and the division. Okay? There were 4 key people: Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. If you can remember the 4 key events, creation, fall, flood, division, if you can remember the 4 key people, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, that's the book of Genesis. This is about the first 11 chapters. This is chapters 12 through 50. That's the book. Now, the book of beginnings, if you remember, there was creation, and God created the heavens and the earth. How did he do it? He spoke it into being. He spoke, he said, let there be light, let there be this. And so here's the creation. And after the creation, and we're going to get into details when we get a little further over in some other the lessons, especially when we get over in the whole salvation, the fall of man and those kind of things, that God created the man and the woman. He put them in the garden. He told them to take care of the garden. He told them to eat from every tree of the garden except for one. It was the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, because it was the tree in which they could learn what? Right from wrong, good from evil. And they were to learn right from wrong by doing right, but they learned right from wrong by doing wrong. And so they fell, and after the fall, God provided a Savior. Genesis 3:15, he talked about the seed of woman coming. And then man got worse and worse and worse and worse. And so God said, okay, what I'm going to do is deal with them. In fact, I'm going to get rid of them. But there was a man by the name of Noah, and Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. And he told Noah to build this ship, this ark, this boat, this big flat-looking thing. And you know, it's so amazing when you think about the ark, and people get so confused, and you start looking at what the ark was like. It was just a big barge is what it was. It was 3 stories, had windows all the way around, had 3 different levels, and they were on that ark for about 370 days, but he brought the flood upon the world, and Noah and his wife and his 3 sons and their 3 wives are the only ones, 8 people that were saved. God brought all the animals 2 by 2, got them on that ark. They could easily fit on the ark. Sometime if you want to do a study, you can find that you could put every known animal could have fit on that ark. It just could. It's just that big. And so the whole flood, and then after the flood, they came off, and Noah came off and got drunk, and everything got kind of messed up again, and then they started, and God told them to divide. God told them to spread out over the whole earth. And some of them said, we're not going to do that because we're going to do our own thing. Because this is what man always does, right? We always do our own thing. And so they decided to do their own thing, and so they moved to a place called, out in a flat plain out there, and they built this tower, a ziggurat, and it was a really tall tower, and it was reaching to heaven. And they said, we're going to reach to heaven. And God said, okay, I'm not going to let them do all that. So he confused their language. And that was called the Tower of Babel, because it comes from Babylon. Babel, I mean, it means to make noise. And so he divided them up, and people all of a sudden couldn't talk to each other, and they had to find groups that could sound the same thing. Oh, I can understand you, but I can't understand that guy. And they got into groups, and they spread throughout the earth. And so that's the first 11 chapters. We don't even know how much time passed from chapter 1 through 11, but at a certain point in time, God found a man by the name of Abram living in the Ur of the Chaldees, which is Iraq, which is down near the Fertile Crescent, and he told this man to leave the land that he was and go to a land that he would show him and that he would give him. And that land is what we call Israel. And so he left, and he went there, and God gave him the land and gave him a promise. In Genesis 12, he said, through you, Abraham, all the nations of the world will be blessed. The Messiah is going to come through this man. And then he had 2 sons, but the son that God picked was Isaac. And then he had these 2 sons, and he picked out of him Jacob. And Jacob had 12 sons. And as you go through the book of Genesis, you see Abraham to Isaac and this people of God, this family, this Jacob and his 12 sons and 1 daughter. Anybody know his daughter's name? Dinah, yeah. And so here's Jacob and his 12 sons and his 1 daughter, and they end up all in Egypt with Joseph, and 70 people go into Egypt. The whole family, 70 people. Everybody says, nation of Israel, 70 people. That's not a nation. They went in as a family. They came out as a nation. And so the book of Genesis, and of course you know that they went down there because Joseph had been raised up to number 2 behind the Pharaoh, and there was a famine in the world, and the Jewish family came to live in Egypt, and everything was great until Joseph died. And the book of Genesis ends with Israel in Egypt. Okay? That's Genesis, right? You got it? Okay, what's the next book? Exodus. Okay, what does Exodus mean? Okay, the word ek, this is a Greek title, by the way. This is a Greek title. Hebrew Bible, the title of books in Hebrew are not titles like Genesis or Exodus. It's based on the first line of the sentence. This book is called In the Beginning. Okay? This is a Greek name. Ek means out of. Ados, which means way. So Exodus is the way out. It's the story of what? What is Exodus about? The story of God bringing the Jewish people out of where? Out of Egypt. And so what we find is at the very beginning, the Jewish people, after Joseph died, there arose a new Pharaoh. He didn't know Joseph. He didn't know the Jewish people. He began to be afraid of the Jewish people, so he made them slaves. And so we begin the book of Exodus with the Jewish people as slaves. And this Pharaoh guy is wanting to kill all these Jews. These Jewish people are populating all over the place, so he decides what he'll do is kill every son. Every Jewish boy that is born, they're supposed to throw in the Nile River. And you can keep the girls because they can intermarry or something, but these boys, we got to get rid of them. And so a man by the name of Amram and his wife Jochebed had a son. And his name, they didn't get his name yet, but his name's going to be Moses. And they hid him for 3 months, and they realized they couldn't hide him any longer. And so his mother said, well, I'll do what Pharaoh said. I will throw him in the Nile River, but I'm going to put him in a basket. You know, because he didn't say you couldn't put him in a basket. So they put him in a little basket, put him out in the water. It floated out. Pharaoh's daughter came down to bathe, and she saw the basket, and she said to one of her slaves, get over there and get that basket. And they got in the water, brought the basket out, opened it up, and when they opened it up, Moses began to cry. The lady went, oh, it's one of those little Hebrew boys. Moses' older sister, Miriam, was standing right there, and she said, you want me to go get one of these Jewish women to nurse the baby boy? And she said, yeah. So they went and got the real mama, and she paid Moses' mama to nurse her own baby. And so Pharaoh's daughter decided to take him, and she called him Moses because it means to draw out. She drew him out, and Moses was raised up for the first 40 years of his life in Egypt, and he was trained in all the ways of Egyptians, and he understood from his mother and daddy that they had thought that he would be a man to lead the people out. And so when he was 40 years old, he actually killed an Egyptian, and he thought the Jewish people would just follow him. And he said, I'm supposed to lead you out. And they went, we don't even know who you are. And he had to run for his life. And for the next 40 years, he's on the backside of the desert. And what he was learning is the first 40 years of being trained in Egypt didn't prepare him to lead the nation of Israel. This next 40 years, he's a shepherd on the backside of the desert because he's got to shepherd the nation of Israel. He comes back at 80 years old, meets Pharaoh, says, let my people go. We all know about the 10 plagues, all of that. And Moses leads the nation of Israel out of Egypt, all the plagues, the parting of the Red Sea, going to Mount Sinai and getting the law. You know, the law is an amazing thing when you think about it. They come to this mountain called Mount Horeb or Mount Sinai. Moses goes up on top of the mountain for a while. In fact, he disappears up there, and they don't know what happened to him. In fact, they begin to say, maybe we ought to go back to Egypt because we don't know what happened to this guy. And they make a golden calf, and it's just a mess. But when Moses comes down, he's got, and by the way, it's not Charlton Heston with these two things coming down, Best we can tell from Scripture, it could be like 2 plates, and he's holding them in one hand. And they probably have the 10 Commandments written in a circle around both sides of these 2 plates. And when he gets to the bottom, he realizes they have already broken every one of these. So he throws them down and breaks them. And he grinds up the golden calf, puts it in water, and makes them drink it. And then he goes back up on the mountain and gets more commandments, but this time instead of 10, it's 613. So you might say, let's try to go with the top 10, because if you're not careful, you'll get so many. But anyway, so Moses gets the law on the top of the mountain. And in a sense, that's the book of what? Exodus. That's what it is. Okay, what's the next book? Leviticus. What do you think of when you think of Leviticus? Well, you do. What do you think of? How about Levi? What's the tribe of Levi? That was the tribe of the what? The priest. Okay, the book of Levi. Now, I want you to think about it. Genesis is beginnings, 4 great events. What were those events? Creation, fall, flood, division. 4 great people. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph. And then Exodus is the story of what? Coming out. Who's the main man? Moses. And what does he get at Mount Sinai? The law. Okay, now Leviticus is going to be an aspect of the law. And during the book of Leviticus, they stay at Mount Sinai for a year. And during that time, they get the law and the sacrificial system and the priesthood and the tabernacle. All of those things happen in Leviticus. So when you're starting to think about the books of the Bible, you got Genesis beginning, you got Exodus coming out, you got Leviticus getting all the law and the priesthood and the sacrifices. Just think of Levi when you hear Leviticus, and when you think of Levi, think of priest, and when you think of priest, you think of temple, sacrifices, and law. That's all you have to remember, right? You got it so far? What's the next book? Numbers, okay? Numbers. Now, Numbers, when you think of the next book, Numbers, think of numbering people, because this is the time they wandered for 40 years in the wilderness. That's what this book is about. So all you have to do is think of Numbers, think of the number what? 40. Now, what happened is, you remember, they left Mount Sinai. It is 11 days' journey from Mount Sinai to a place called Kadesh Beer. And when they got there, they stopped, and they were supposed to go into the land. God said, this is the land I promised you. This is the land that I gave to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph. Y'all got down in Egypt. I got you out of Egypt. I got you the law. Now you're supposed to go into the land. And you would think that everybody would do what? Yippee! We're going to the land. But they didn't. They said, maybe we better check it out. And so they said, okay, let's pick 12 guys. We're going to pick 12 guys, one from each of the 12 tribes. And so we're going to pick them up. Joshua, Caleb, you come over here too. You guys go. Y'all go in, spy the land out and tell. They went in, they went to the bottom, they went to the south, they went to the top, they went all the way back. They came back, they brought back grapes that were so much of them that it took 2 guys to carry them. And they came back and they said, greatest land we've ever seen. Flowing with milk and honey. It is fantastic. And they went, that is good. But then 10 of them said, well, it's great, but those people are giants, and they got these big, tall walls. I don't think we can take the land. Joshua and Caleb said, oh, yeah, we can take the land because God said it's our land, and we can take the land. If God said take the land, take the land. The 10 said, I don't think so. All the people went, I don't think so. And so they got all scared, and they wouldn't go into the land. And so God said, okay, if you're not going to go in the land, for every day you spied out the land, they spied out the land for how many days? 40 days. He said, for that, you will wander for 40 years until this generation of people who wouldn't believe me, till they all die off. And for 40 years, they wandered in the wilderness until that whole generation of people died off. That's what the book of Numbers is about. Now, there's one famous story in Numbers that you just have to remember. It's found in Numbers chapter 21. And the people were wandering, and snakes began to bite them. And they began to die from snake bites. So they came running to Moses, and they said, snakes are biting us and we're dying. You better do something. So Moses went to God. And God said, here's what I want you to do. I want you to take some bronze, and I want you to take a piece of bronze, and I want you to make it look like a snake. Okay? And then I want you to take it and put it on the top of a pole and put the pole up in the camp, way up there so everybody can see it. So there's a snake on top of a pole. He said, here's what happens. Anytime somebody gets bit, all they have to do is look up there. If they just look there, they won't die. They got to believe me, right? You got to trust God that if a snake bites you, all you have to do is look up there. If you look up there, you won't die. That's called what? Faith. And that's exactly what happened. When they got bit by a snake, all they had to do was look up there. And Jesus, later on in John chapter 3, told Nicodemus, as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, so must the Son of Man be lifted up. Whoever believes in him will have eternal life. So in the same way that all they had to do was believe and they would be saved, Jesus Christ lifted up on the cross. All we have to do is believe in him, and we're saved. So it's a great story. That's the book of Numbers. So we got beginning. Creation, fall, flood, division, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph. We got Exodus, Moses, and law. We got Leviticus getting law and sacrifices. We got Numbers, not trusting God and having to wonder for 40 years. And what's the next book? Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy means second law. Because back over here in Leviticus, they got the law. Is that right? Well, in Deuteronomy, they're about to go into the new land, the promised land, and they stop on the edge of the Jordan River, and Moses gives 3 messages. The book of Deuteronomy is Moses talking 3 different times, and he is giving the law a second time. That's what Deuteronomy is about. So whenever you think of Deuteronomy, you think of second law. Now, it's an amazing thing because Moses led the people all this way. Aaron had already died, and it was, you'd think that earlier Moses got mad at the people. You remember all Moses did one time? God said, well, how are we going to get, the people said, how are we going to get water? And God said, Moses, you take your staff and you hit a rock. Moses hit the rock, water came out. The next time they came to a place that they didn't have any water, God said, Moses, speak to the rock. Just speak to the rock. Moses is supposed to go, water. And water's supposed to come out. But Moses started griping at the people. He actually did. He started saying, you people, y'all don't believe God on anything. Y'all are worthless. I'm telling you what. And he hit the rock and nothing came out. And he hit the rock again and water came out. And then God said, because you disobeyed me in front of all these people, you will not enter the land. Moses said, how about one more shot? And God said, don't ask me. God said, don't ask me again. Now, this is probably one of the greatest men who ever lived. Sometimes people say, all he did was hit a rock. He was the representative and the main man. And here's what he did. So Moses gets here at Deuteronomy. He's standing in the Jordan River. They're all fixing to cross over and go into the land. He knows he's not going to get to go. And God lets him go up on a mount called Mount Pisgah. And he got on top of that mount. And God said, I'm going to let you look at the land. And he got to see the land. And then God said, now you're going to die. And he died. And that's the first 5 books. Right? Okay, we got it, huh? We got it memorized, haven't we? Right. A lot of good stuff in there, isn't it? I've got it erased. What's the book of Genesis, the 4 big events? Creation, fall, flood, division. What's the 4 great people? Isaac, Jacob, Joseph. Book of Exodus means what? Means coming out. Who's the main man? Moses. After they came out, what'd they get? Law. The book of Leviticus talks about getting the what? The law in the tabernacle, the temple. The book of Numbers talks about their wandering around for how long? And the book of Deuteronomy is second law right before they go into the land. Okay, now, that's pretty much the first 5 books, isn't it? Are we okay? All right, now, let's go history real quick, right? There's a lot of books in there. What's the next book? Joshua. See, who is Joshua? He was Joshua, son of Nun, which he was Moses' right-hand man. And when Moses died, God told Moses to tell everybody, he says, after I die, Joshua will be the man to lead you in. And he called Joshua and he said, be strong and courageous. Don't let anything top you. Just keep on going. Don't let up. And so they got ready to cross. How are they going to get in? Listen, they get ready to go into the promised land, but what's right in front of them? A river. It's the Jordan River, and it's at flood stage. And right across the Jordan River is what city? Jericho, the city of palms, one of the oldest cities in the world. And it's got this big wall around it. And the people in Jericho have looked out and they've seen across the river, they see a whole bunch of people, about 2.5 million Jewish people. And so they're all scared, but they also say, I don't think we're going to have to worry about much because they can't get across the river. So some spies kind of, swam across, got across, came into the city, spied it all out. They found a woman who was a harlot, Rahab, who saved their life. And she said, I know God's given the city to you, so when y'all come and take the city, don't kill me. And they said, you get you and your family in this room, and when we take the city, we'll save your life. Now, if you get out of this room, tough, right? Tough. So they went back across, and they told them, everybody in the city's scared. And then they said, well, how are we going to get across? And Joshua said, here's what we're supposed to do. We're going to get the priest from Levi. They're going to take the Ark of the Covenant. They're going to walk right up to the edge of the river, and they're going to step in the river. And as soon as they step in the river, the water's going to stop. And sure enough, they stepped in the river, and it became dry land. And it actually stopped flowing at a place called Adam, which was about a couple of miles further up from the river. And suddenly the entire river bed became dry land. Not mud, but dry land. And the Jewish people crossed right there. And they said, let's don't forget this. So they got some big rocks out of the river bed, and they put them on 12 rocks, and they put them up in a big pile and said, anytime we think about and see those rocks, we remember how God stopped the river. Meanwhile, the people in Jericho said, I don't know how, but they got to cross the river, right? And so the Jewish people decided they were going to take Jericho, and it was the weirdest thing because they decided not to attack in the way that you normally attack. But God said, I want everybody to line up in the groups, some people with some horns. You're going to blow some horns, followed by the Ark of the Covenant, followed by some other people, and on one day we're going to go and march around the entire city and come back home, and we're going to do that for 6 days in a row. And so can you imagine the people in Jericho watching all these Jewish people blowing trumpets, marching around the city and going back? And they said, these people are stupid. They're stupid. But on the seventh day, they marched around 7 times, and at the 7th time, Joshua had told them to shout. And when they shouted, the walls fell down, and they conquered the city. And what the story of Joshua is about, and by the name Joshua is Yeshua, which is the same name as Jesus. Joshua is a Hebrew name for Savior. Joshua was the Savior to people because he took them into the promised land. And they went into the promised land, and they conquered the middle of the promised land. They conquered the northern part of the promised land, and they conquered the southern part of the promised land. So the book of Joshua is the story of them conquering the land. They had to defeat all the enemies. God just didn't give it over to them. He said you have to defeat the enemy, but it was his power that defeated the enemy. And some of the book of Joshua, which is a little bit slow, is the division of the land. They divide all the land up against all the tribes. So some of the chapters you'll go, that's really interesting. Because, it's just he got this land and this land and this land and this land. But they get all the land. That's the book of Joshua, right? What's the next book? Judges and Ruth. They go together, okay? Judges and Ruth. Now I'm going to give you quickly, after Joshua died, it said the next generation of people believed God. But after that generation died, they didn't believe God anymore. And they turned away from God. And they began to worship false gods. They began to turn away from the Bible. They began to do all these wrong things. So God allowed an enemy to come and conquer them in the land. And they'd be conquered. And they'd be sad. And they'd cry out to God. And God would raise up a leader to fight for them. And they would have victory. And they would win. And they'd be okay again. And then they'd turn away from God. And he'd let them get conquered. And then it happened 7 times in the book of Judges. And it's a story of how God continually raised up judges. The word judge, it means a deliverer. And so the people would turn away from God. It's really the story of these cycles of how they turned away from God, and God would raise up a deliverer. And that's what the book is about. It goes over and over again. You know a famous judge? Some famous Gideon? Samson? Anybody know Ehud? Ehud was a left-handed guy. See, most people weren't left-handed. And so he went in to see this king who was really, really big, fat guy. And he went in to see this king, and they checked him, and they said, got a sword, got a sword? No, you don't have a sword, because, see, most people, they have the sword right here because he's right-handed. But he wasn't right-handed. He was left-handed, so he had the sword hid right here. And so he went in to see the king and told the king something, and then he said, by the way, I need to tell the king a secret. And so they stepped out for a minute, and the king said, what's the secret? And he went, I got a sword, I'm going to stick you in the stomach. And he did. And when he stuck him, it said he was so heavy that he couldn't get the sword out. So he said, that's bad. And so he slipped out the window and left. And the guards were outside the door, and they said, how long is that guy going to be in there? And then they thought, I think the king may be using the bathroom. And so they waited a little bit longer, and they said, he's been in the bathroom a long time. So they broke in through the doors and found that he was dead. And this judge Ehud led the Jewish people to defeat this bad old king, and they won. And that went over and over. And Gideon did the same thing, if you remember the story of Gideon. And who was another famous judge? You remember? Samson. What's the story of Samson? He had what? Long hair. Do you know what he was? He was a Nazarite. You know what a Nazarite is? Not a Nazarene. Nazarene is somebody from Nazareth. A Nazarite was somebody that took a vow, that you took a vow for a certain period of time in which you originally started by shaving your head, and then you didn't cut your hair until it just grew and grew and grew until a certain time. You couldn't eat anything with grapes or raisins or wine, and you couldn't touch anything dead. That was a Nazarite. That's how they were set apart. this man named Samson was a Nazarite from the time he was a baby. And so when he grew up, he had this long hair and everything. And he was so powerful. He could defeat anybody. He killed 1,000 men one time. It was just amazing strength, and it was all from God. But he fell in love. He was the most fleshly man you'll ever find. He fell in love with this woman named Delilah, and she was a Philistine, and the Philistines wanted to kill Samson. And so they got her. They tricked her and said, we'll give you money if you'll find out where his strength is. And she tried to find out, and he told her all kind of stupid things. And every time she had tried, he'd break it open. And then finally he told her, if you cut my hair, that's where my strength is, because he would be breaking his vow. And sure enough, while he was asleep, I don't know how this happened, but she shaved his head. And all of a sudden the Philistines broke in, and he jumped up, and he didn't have any strength. And they got him, and they poked his eyes out. And it was just a horrible thing. And so they had this temple called the Temple of Dagon, and about 5,000 Philistines or 6,000 Philistines were in the temple. They decided to bring out Samson and to laugh at him. And so they brought him out. He's blind, and he can't see anything. And they tie him between these two big old posts, and it happens to be the two biggest poles that hold up the temple. And he's standing there, and he prays to God, give me strength one last time. And God gave him his strength back. And he pushed the thing down, and the whole temple fell down to about 4,000, 5,000 Philistines died. And it said that he killed more Philistines in his death, because he died then too, than he did in his life. That was the last judge of the book of Judges. Now, the book of Ruth, as you know, took place at the same time of the Judges, and it's the story of redemption, and it's the story of a Moabite girl who gets saved, basically, by a man named Boaz. And if you've never studied the book of Ruth, it's only 4 chapters. It is one of the greatest books in the Bible, because it's a foreshadow of Jesus Christ, who is our Redeemer. So sometime just go look at the book of Ruth, and you'll be amazed at what's in it, because it's about it called the kinsman redeemer, and it's a picture of our Savior Jesus. Okay, so we got Joshua, Judges, Ruth. What's next? Anybody know? Huh? Yeah. We got to know this. Okay, 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel. What's after that? 1 Kings, 2 Kings. What's after that? 1 Chronicles, 2 Chronicles. Okay. 1 Samuel is about who? Samuel. Okay, we got it. Okay, Samuel and Saul. Saul was the first king of Israel. Samuel was the last judge. He was a great judge, but his sons were bad. And so the nation of Israel said, Samuel, we would like to have a king like everybody else. Samuel went to God, and he said, I'm really mad about this. God said, don't worry, they not rejected you, they rejected me. But we're going to give them a king. And they picked a man by the name of Saul. And you know why they picked him? He was good looking, and he was the tallest person there. He was taller than anybody else. I can't imagine looking over people's heads, right? Can you? Some of you might could. I can't. And so he was the tallest, and he was the handsomest, and he was going to be a great king. And he openly, continually disobeyed God. And when he disobeyed God, instead of confessing his sin and saying, I blew it, he did his own thing. And so God said, I'm going to remove you from being king. And he found a boy that was probably 14 or 15 years old. And he said, God said, this will be the next king. And that boy was who? David. And see, 2 Samuel is going to be about David. But if you remember, the most famous story about David was what? There's 2 famous stories in David's life. What are they? Fighting Goliath and Bathsheba. So there's great and there's bad. And when he was a young boy at 14, he went to see where his brothers were. His 3 oldest brothers were fighting the Philistines. The Jewish people were lined up on one hill. The Philistines were lined up on another hill. The Jewish people are afraid to fight. The Philistines have this man that's 9 feet 9 inches tall named Goliath. He comes out every day and says, who'll fight me? And everybody's so scared. Nobody will fight him. And David shows up, and he's a little boy. He's a boy. And he says, what's going on? What's going on? What's going on? Everybody said, get back. What do you think you're doing? He said, what's this guy doing? And he said, he's making fun of God. Yeah, he is making fun of God. David said, I'll fight him. He said, they took him right to Saul, King Saul, who was the tallest, biggest. Who should have fought him? King Saul should have fought him, because King Saul's the tallest Jew. King Saul said, what, are you going to fight him? Oh, yeah, I can whip him. See, I've whipped bears. I've whipped lions. They got after my sheep. I killed them. Okay, here, you can have my armor. He puts it on. I don't think I can use this armor. It's a little big. So he takes it back off, goes out, picks up 5 stones. Why 5 stones? Goliath had 4 brothers. They're listed in the scripture. So just in case he killed Goliath, he needed to get the brothers. He got there, and he came out, and Goliath came out and started laughing at him and said, Look at this kid coming out to fight me. And David said, you come with me with a sword and shield, but I come to you in the name of the living God. And he took that sling, and he hit that guy right there. And the guy went, oh, that hurts. And fell down. David went up, picked that giant sword that he had, and cut his head off, picked that head up, looked like this, and all the Philistines went, uh-oh, and they took off. And Jewish people had a great victory. That's David as a young boy. God anointed him as the king. It took 15 years before he ever became the king because Saul tried to kill him. But finally Saul got killed in a battle. David became the king. And so 2 Samuel is the story of David. And of course David, besides David and Goliath, what's the other story, which is so sad? David and Bathsheba. And he blew it. But let me tell you what happened. When Saul blew it, Saul said, so what? When David blew it, he confessed it. And that's why God calls David a man after God's own heart. Failure is not the end. It doesn't have to be the end. And so the 2 Samuel is about David. Now, at the end, when David basically died, who took over? Who was next? Solomon. And see, there was some issue at the end when David was about to die. Who was going to be the next king? And David had all these sons, and they were all fighting for positions. But David had already promised that Solomon would be the king. And so Solomon became the king, and Solomon was the wisest man who ever lived. And he was probably the richest man who ever lived. He became king of Israel. They built the temple. It was just so magnificent what Solomon did. And he was the wisest man. Do you remember the most famous story, or one of the most famous stories of showing the wisdom of Solomon? The baby. Solomon's the king, and these two women come. These two prostitutes come, and they had both had babies. One night, and during the night, one of the women rolled over on her baby and smothered him. And when she woke up, she found she had smothered the baby, so she grabbed the other lady's baby. And when they woke up, she said, "That's my baby." "No, it's not my baby." And they argued, and so they went to see the king. And King Solomon stood there, and the last lady said, "That's my baby." Another lady said, "That's my baby." And said, "Well, how is he going to figure it out?" He said, "Okay, here's what we'll do. Give me a sword. We'll just cut the baby in half and give it half to each of these women." And the real mother said, No. She can have him. And the other lady said, "Cut him in half." And he said, No, you're not the mother. Give it to this woman. And people went, wow, that's smart. That's smart. He's wise. Wisest man who ever lived. When he became king, God said, "What do you want, Solomon? What do you want?" Solomon said, "Well, I got to have wisdom to rule these great people." And God said, "Well, you didn't ask for money. You didn't ask for riches. You didn't ask for fame. But you asked for wisdom. So I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you wisdom, and I'm going to give you money. I'm going to give you riches. I'm going to give you fame. I'm giving it all to you." And he was the wisest, richest man who ever lived, and yet, at the end of his life, he turned away from God. Doesn't mean he's not a believer. He's a believer. He turned away from God and worshiped false gods. Can you believe that? At 1 Kings also deals with the life of Solomon. It also deals with the kings, because after Solomon, the nation divided. The nation divided into a northern kingdom called Israel and a southern kingdom called Judah. And the story of First and Second Kings deals with all this. First and Second Chronicles gives much of the same information as 2 Samuel and Kings, but it gives it to it from a little different perspective. But what happened is all these kings came in and out, and bad kings and good kings. And in 722 BC, the Assyrians conquered the northern empire, and in 605, 598, 585, 3 deportations, the Babylonians came in and conquered Judah and took them off into captivity for 70 years. It's so sad. It's over. The greatest nation in the world divided and conquered. And that's 1 and 2 Samuel, 1 and 2 Kings, 1 and 2 Chronicles. What's next? Okay, they went into captivity. Anybody know for how long? 70 years. Jeremiah said, a prophet wrote that they would be in captivity for 70 years. Guess how long they were in captivity? Exactly 70 years. And when they came out of the captivity, a king by the name of Cyrus, king of Persia, rose to power and said, "For some strange reason, I think I should let all the Jews go back home." It's because God raised him up and put it in his heart, and he let all the Jews go back home. And you have 3 books. What are they? Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther. The book of Ezra is the story of them coming back and building the temple. The book of Nehemiah is them coming back and building the walls of Jerusalem. And the book of Esther is the story of the Jews who did not come back. And that pretty much wraps up the history books, right? Isn't that it? Is that pretty fun? Is that a flow? Okay. What comes after that? Okay. Has everybody kind of got it? I mean, you're just getting big ideas. I'll expect all of this on the quiz, but, right? Okay. What's next? The writings. What are the books of the writings? What are some of them? How about Job? What's Job about? It's about suffering. It is. Job was this rich man. Job was the richest man, in fact, in all of the world of anybody around him. He had the prettiest daughters, the greatest sons, the most cattle, the most camel, the most everything, the best house, the best everything. He was blessed by God, and he was a great man. And he was the priest of his family. He lived about the same time as Abraham. And he was just a great man. And one day what happened? Satan, who has access to God, you realize that. When Satan goes to God, what does he say about you? First of all, he lies because he's a liar. John 8:44, he's a liar. But he doesn't have to lie. Can he say JB's a sinner? Is JB a bad sinner? Is JB raunchy? Yeah, that's not a lie. I'm horrible. Aren't you horrible? You're horrible. I know you. I know you. Right? I mean, he doesn't. Okay, but, right? So, Satan is a liar, so he goes to see God, and somehow it comes up about Job, and Satan says, the only reason Job loves you is because you've blessed him. And God says, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll allow you to touch him. You can't kill him, but you can touch him. And he loses everything. Everything but his wife. And she actually says, why don't you just curse God and die? He went, well, that's a great wife, all right? But everything happens. These three friends come to see him. They start off by a whole week of just sitting there with him in sadness. And then they begin to speak. And they begin to accuse him. And they say that if you weren't a sinner, this wouldn't have happened to you. And Job said, I haven't done anything wrong. I don't know why this happened to me. I'm not a sinner. And they went on. And as you go through the book of Job, it gets worse and worse and worse. Some people say Job teaches us why we suffer. No, it doesn't. Job shows us how to respond to suffering. And what Job did is he trusted God. So it's to respond to suffering. All the way through, Job says, I didn't do it. I didn't do it. I didn't do anything. I didn't do anything. I didn't do anything. If God were here, I'd tell him. And at the end, God shows up. And what does Job say? Job says, I can't talk. You're too powerful. And God says, Job, where were you when I made everything? Where were you when I did this? Where were you when I did this? Where were you when I did this? Who makes the snow? Who makes the rain? Who makes this? Who made the oceans? Who did all this? Who put the earth on this? Who makes this? He went all the way through, and Job finally said, you're right. You're everything. I don't know what I'm talking about. And it was all over. God said, Job, you're all right. Now, your three friends, on the other hand, they said a lot of wrong things. But I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to let you offer a sacrifice for them, and I'll accept it. They were all going, wow, thank you. You know. And then God gave Job everything back. The whole purpose of the book of Job is to what? How do we respond to suffering? Okay. What's the next book? Psalms. Oh, what are Psalms? They're songs. They're songs. Have you ever looked at the Psalms carefully? It'll say Psalm 50 something, something, something to the tune of the lily of the morning or something. You go, what tune? Obviously, the words were what are inspired, not the tune. But they had tunes. They sang songs. Who wrote half the songs? David. David, you know, when you think of David, what could he do? He could do everything. He was a fighter, a warrior, handsome guy. He could play music. He could probably sing. He could take care of sheep. He could do anything. He could dance. He danced before the what? The ark. People say it's wrong to dance. Wrong to dance. David twirled in front of the Ark of the Covenant. I think it's sort of how you dance that could be right or wrong, not whether you dance, right? Okay? So the Psalms are worship songs. That's what they are. They were the songs they sang when they worshiped God. And have you ever read the Psalms and you feel like that it's actually you talking? That it hits you exactly where you are? And you go, it says, "Oh Lord, you have seen me, you have searched me. I need you. You are my strength. You are my shield." And you go, "That's right. That's right. That's what I need." It's amazing. So read the Psalms. Read the Psalms. The wisdom literature. What's the next book? Proverbs. What are Proverbs? They are wisdom. Now let me tell you something you need to do. Okay, here's something I would like for you to do. Why don't you do this? There are how many? There's 31 Proverbs. How many days in the month are they usually? Around 30 or 31. How many months have 28? All of them. Okay, I couldn't trick you. Okay, now here's what you do. Like today is what day? 14th, right? So today read Psalm 14. Tomorrow read Psalm 15. If you skip a day, if you get messed up, 3 days pass, you look up, it's the 19th. What psalm should you read? What Proverbs should you read? The 19th. And if you do that every day, you are reading through the entire book of Proverbs every month. What will happen is you'll begin to read them, and you'll begin to see wisdom literature, and it'll say the wise man does this, but the foolish man does this. And after a while, you'll say, if I want to be wise, I'm going to do this and not this. And so what you should do is read wisdom literature, because it'll change your life. And the more you read it, and the more of those Proverbs you read, you'll start saying, well, that's right. That's a wise thing. One of them that always, hits me is like a wise man, holds his tongue, or a wise man overlooks an insult. I'll show you foolishness. Foolishness is you're walking out, somebody's wearing, some guy says, hey, jerk. And you go, you calling me a jerk? You calling me a jerk? Hey, you want some of me, buddy? You can get in a fight and get yourself all beat up, right? A wise man, the guy says, hey, jerk, and you go, hey, go right onto the car, man. Why do I need to fight? A wise man doesn't have to fight. A wise man overlooks an insult. That's what it's all about, right? So you got the wisdom literature there. What's the next book? Oh, Ecclesiastes. That's just the fun reading, isn't it? What does Ecclesiastes say? Vanity, vanity, everything's vanity. Well, that's a great life, isn't it? You know who wrote that? Solomon. When do you think he wrote that? About the end of his life, probably. And you say, well, Solomon, you got yourself into some depression, man. Right? You know what he says? Vanity, vanity, everything's vanity under the sun. See, under the sun in a fallen world, everything is vain. With Jesus Christ, nothing's vain. And so the whole book is saying that when you look at life in a fallen world, it's vain. And what does he say do? He says, here's the bottom line. Enjoy life and obey God. That's what he says. That's what Ecclesiastes is about. He says in Ecclesiastes that God has put eternity in our hearts. Don't you think there's something more than this? Isn't there something more than this? There is. There's something more than this. There's eternity in our hearts. Ecclesiastes tells us that. Okay, what's the last one? Which one? Oh, boy. Did you know some people said that probably shouldn't be in there because that's dealing with what? That's dealing with sex. It's dealing with sex. It's dealing with these two, this man, this King Solomon and his woman. But King Solomon only had 100 women. Which one is it, right? Actually, it's his favorite one, and it's a story of love. And some people throughout history have said, oh, you can't really talk about a man and a woman and their love and all that stuff, so this must be just a picture of God's love for us. I think it's a picture of love of two people, that God says people come together and they love one another. And it's a great story. And it's Solomon and his queen. And it's a great picture of loving and caring about each other. They get in a little fight and they break up for a little bit and then they come back together. It's just a great thing. So read it. There's some really good underlined parts. Okay, that's the writings, right? Okay, what's next? Oh, that's with the prophets. Jeremiah, Lamentations, they go together. Jeremiah wrote Lamentations. Okay, we'll get it. Okay, now you got what? What's next? Prophets, and there's two kind of prophets. What are they? Major, minor. And the difference is basically the what? The length. That's what it is. Now, let me give you something, because when you start thinking about prophets and you think about all these names and you go, boy, time's almost up. Let me go fast, okay? When you think about all these names and you say, how am I going to keep up with what these things are about? I've got something that's going to make you feel really good. You ready? On almost all of the prophets, here's the message. It is a message of judgment and restoration. So if somebody said to you, what's the book of Isaiah about? What would you say? It's the story of judgment and restoration. What about Ezekiel? It's the story of judgment and restoration. So if you just remember that. Now Isaiah, let me just give you, Isaiah is 66 chapters. It's powerful. Some of the greatest passages in the Bible are there. It tells us about the Messiah and his birth and his coming as the king. And there's just so much in there. It's a story of judgment. The first 39 chapters are judgment. And then chapters 40 through 66 are restoration. The book of Isaiah has everything. It even has the kingdom, the eternal kingdom. So all of that is in the book of Isaiah. Then there's Jeremiah and Lamentations go together. Jeremiah was a prophet who told the Jewish people what is coming. What is coming? Judgment. What's going to come after that? Restoration. He saw the judgment. And the book of Lamentations is Jeremiah standing on the hill of Jerusalem looking at the city, all the dead bodies. And the book of Lamentations is a lament where he is saying, look at all the destruction. But he says, behold, the Lord's loving kindness and deeds never cease. They're new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. That's from Lamentations 3. Okay? Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel. I have to tell you that Ezekiel is the weirdest book. If you ever want to read something that's weird and you want to see it, Ezekiel was a prophet. God told him to do all kind of weird things. He told him to lay on one side for so many days, lay on another side so many days. He told him to invite people over to your house, take most of your clothes off, put a bunch of stuff in a bag, tear a hole in your wall, and go out and tell them this is how it's going to happen to us. We're going to run for our lives. We're going to have to go out. He said, build a little toy, get outside, build a little toy city, put little soldiers and everything, and put up big ramps and everything, and people are going to come up and say, what's going to happen? He said, this is our city being besieged. He told him to stand, to get all people in front of him and cut his hair. And cut his hair and take his hair in 3 parts. Put some of his hair right there. Take some of his hair and throw it into a fire. Take some of his hair and take a sword and cut his hair up. And everybody says, what you talking about? He said, well, a third of us are going to be killed by the sword. A third of us are going to burn in the fire. And a third of us are going to be taken off into captivity. He had story after story after story. It's weird. And he told him, you got to go buy you a new belt. He got a new belt. He said, now take that belt, put it in water, go put it in a rock, come back many days. Okay. He comes back many days. He said, now look at your belt. He pulls out the belt. He said, it's ruined. He said, that's Israel. You're ruined. He did that all through the book of Ezekiel. That's amazing. Ezekiel, he saw God in this big throne thing coming. Scared him to death. It had wings and eyes and feet coming down and faces, and it was just the weirdest thing. So look at that. The next book is Daniel. I'm going to go fast. The book of Daniel. Daniel's the greatest, one of my favorite books of all time, because you see the character of Daniel, you see all of the end-time prophecies. You can take the book of Daniel and you can put together the entire Bible on all the end times from this book right here. If you take the book of Daniel and Revelation and put them together, you can put together every bit of the end-time events in the world, how they fit in the Scripture, those 2 books. And so Daniel is great because you see the character of Daniel. Then you got the minor prophets. Now let me show you something. You are where? Are you on the page that says before captivity, during captivity, after captivity? Have you got to that next page? Now see that next page? I want to show you something just so you can see this. Now if somebody asks you, what are mostly the prophets about? You would say what? Judgment and restoration. Now these guys didn't all write at one time. They wrote at different times. So what I want to give you, and on the quiz, this page will be on the quiz. This page right there will be on the quiz. And so I'm going to give you who are the prophets that wrote. Some wrote before captivity, some wrote during captivity, some wrote after captivity. Are you ready for this? Okay. Who wrote to Israel? 2 of them, Hosea and Amos. Okay. Who wrote to Assyria? Jonah and Nahum. You remember the story of Jonah? God told him to go to where? Nineveh, which is the capital of the Assyrian Empire, and tell them in 40 days the whole city is going to be destroyed. He didn't go. He ran the opposite way, got swallowed by a big fish, saved his life, got back up on the shore, went back up there, and told them, 40 days, the whole city will be destroyed. Everyone in the city of Nineveh believed God. Put on sackcloth and ashes, and God said, okay, changed my mind. I'm not going to destroy him. And Jonah was mad because Jonah hated them because they were his enemy. They were going to come kill him, and they did. They came and got the Jewish people, these same people. Okay, to Judah, there's 6 people. Ready? Joel, Isaiah, Micah, Jeremiah, Habakkuk, not tobacco, but Habakkuk, and Zephaniah. Now, if I asked you, what is Zephaniah about, what would you say? It's mostly about what? Judgment and restoration. So you got it. You don't have to know everything. The last one is Edom, and that is Obadiah. Okay, those people all wrote before the captivity. Now, 2 people wrote during captivity. One is Ezekiel. The other is Daniel. And then 3 wrote after captivity. Haggai. It's not Haggai, it's Haggai. Zechariah. And Malachi. That's when they wrote. Now, that'll be on the quiz, so you need to memorize this page right here. Not that hard. And then you got it. Now, let me show you something before we do the quiz. If you notice in your book, you're at the end of the chapter, right? End of chapter 3. You have a green sheet. Everybody turn to the green sheet. And if you missed something, we'll get it in just a minute. The green sheet gives you an overview. Notice the law, the history, the book, and the history continues. So I have that for you. Then we have the wisdom literature for you. Then I have in that blue, that purple thing, it shows you the books of the Hebrew Bible, the Protestant Bible, and the Roman Catholic Bible. And the Hebrew Bible, if you notice, they're the same books. They got different names, and they're organized in a different way. And then if you flip the page, I've got what happened between the Testaments. Now, this is one of the greatest resources you will ever have. Let me tell you why. Because I didn't do all this. I've got some help, and this thing gives you the history of what happened in between the Old Testament and the New Testament in that 400 years that always people talk about, the 400 silent years. This tells you the things that happened. It talks about Xerxes and the Greeks and the Macedonians and the Romans and Herod and the scribes and the rabbis and the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the priests. It gives you all of that history. It takes you right up to the time of Christ. So if you this would take you, if you decided you were going to try to search this yourself, it'd take forever. So I have for you in these 6 or 7, 8, 9 pages a lot of information that you can use for resources. The next page, if you see, is yellow, and it gives you the Old Testament, the history, the poetry, and the prophets side of war put together for you real quickly. Then the pink one is basically gives you all the Old Testament books and gives you basically the quick theme for each one, like Genesis, the book of beginnings. Exodus is the redemption delivers. Leviticus is the sacrifices. Numbers is the disbelief. Deuteronomy is the second law, that kind of thing. So I've had that all for you. So there's a lot of resources for you. Now, when we get to the New Testament, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to talk through the New Testament, and then you're going to have a lot of resources that will help you as far as the New Testament is concerned. If you notice at the very end, there is memory verses. They're Isaiah 53:6. All we like sheep have gone astray, each one our own way. The Lord hath laid on him the iniquity of us all. And then Lamentations 3:22 and 23. Behold, the Lord's loving kindness indeed never ceased. Their compassions never fail. The new every morning great is thy faithfulness. So that's the verses to memorize. Okay?